Warford updates with Mr. Warford updates with Mr. Warford updates with Mr. Warford.
What's up? Welcome to another episode of Updates with Mr. Warford. This is for my world history people. We talked about the printing press and the Northern Renaissance yesterday. Now we're going to focus back on Italy and talk about Italian city-states. All right, so the Italian government during the Renaissance, they weren't under one central government. Remember from earlier in the year, in Italy, the feudal system from Western Europe had not really taken hold. They didn't really have this system of kings, queens, they should say nobles. They didn't have one central government in Italy like had taken control in Western Europe during the Middle Ages. They had individual, what were called city-states, okay? They were ruled by wealthy families that became rich in trade or banking. Workers during the Renaissance actually began rebelling against the wealthy upper class, and some city-states actually came under the control of just one family or one individual that managed to maintain power. The social pecking order, the social order in Italy during the Renaissance, at the top were wealthy merchants and bankers. The next level were shopkeepers and artisans and business owners, and then at the bottom were peasants and farmers that worked for the wealthy. So the Italian city-states, some of the major ones that existed were Florence, Milan, Venice, Rome, and Naples. We're going to talk about a few. Something that you need to keep in mind, the big thing about the city-states that we think about when we look back on the Renaissance is they spent lavishly to support the arts and support these humanist ideas and science and philosophy and writing. They were huge into the arts and discovery of self, like we talked about when we talked about humanism earlier in the unit. So we're going to talk about three specific city-states. The first one is Venice. Venice was a link between Asia and Western Europe. So if you look where Venice is located, it's kind of the gatekeeper into Italy, okay? If you go east here, you're going to run into the continent of Asia. So after the Crusades, trade is happening back and forth between these two continents, and Venice is kind of that gate to get into Italy. So they become a really important trade hub into Renaissance Italy. They become almost like a trade empire that's internationally known, and it's run by the wealthy merchants there. The next one is Florence. They were controlled by the Medici family. They were known for textiles, which is a fancy word for clothing and fabrics. Banking, art was huge, philosophy and writing. They fostered that spirit of humanism a lot in Florence, and some historians call it the birthplace of the Renaissance. You need to know the Medici family. It's on your vocab list, and it's going to be on your exam. Okay, in the 1400s, the Medici family organized a successful banking business and then turned that into political power in the city-state of Florence. Okay, they introduced things like an income tax that weighed heavier on the rich so the government could afford things like sewers and paved city streets. Now that doesn't seem like a big deal. Back then it was a big deal for a city to have those things. The Medicis were some of the richest merchants and bankers in all of Europe. And this is why they're a big deal in history, and that's why I put it in red. They were patrons of the arts. Back then, some of the greatest pieces of art that we see from the Renaissance period, it took years and lots of money to make those pieces of art. So the wealthy class would actually fund, they called it commissioning art, give money to these artists so they could make these incredible works of art that have stood the test of time for hundreds and hundreds of years. Just to name a few artists that the Medicis helped support, Michelangelo, Raphael, Da Vinci. They also supported the famous scientist Galileo Galilei. And last, Milan, okay? Milan was located at a crossroads of main trade routes from Italian coastal cities into the Alps, okay? If you see here on our map, they're kind of at the most northern point, and similar to how Venice was like this intermediary between Asia and Italy, Milan was kind of like that between Western Europe and then going down into Italy. They were big into silk, the wool trade, and they controlled a lot of the trade in general of that northern region. And a big family or two big families that were involved in the control of Milan during the Renaissance in that city-state were the Visconti families, or the Visconti family and the Sforza family. They were not as well known as patrons of the art as Florence was, but the Sforza family did help commission one of the most famous pieces of art ever, Da Vinci's The Last Supper, and I'm sure you've seen that depicted somewhere. So city-states. Who cares? Why are they a big deal? Warford, why am I reading about this, watching this video? Why do I care? Here's the reason Italian city-states are important. They were like the incubators for new ideas during the Renaissance. Remember we talked about humanism? If these city-states had not been successful during the Renaissance, we wouldn't have had art, philosophy, science, and writing that would eventually shape the world for centuries to come after the Renaissance. So that's why the success of these city-states was important. So you need to know a little bit about those three city-states that we talked about. You need to know the Medici family, and you need to know why city-states and the success of city-states were a big deal. And it was because they were incubators for that humanist thought. And we have art, philosophy, science, and writing that has stood the test of time for hundreds of years because of these city-states. If you have any questions, let me know. Peace.